Welcome to Talking Giants Player Profiles and Projections, brought to you by Captain Morgan. And today we are looking at John Michael Schmitz and Kayvon Thibodeaux. John Michael Schmitz, we're going to start with him on the offensive side. 6'4", 320 pounds, center, 25 years old, but entering year two as a second-round pick. With JMS, objectively, it was a bad rookie year for him. But I do want to talk about him and why I have hope for him. Because, you look pre-injury, right? And you got some really good JMS film, but there was a couple ugly reps a game, right? Now, long-term at center, you can't have, hey, it's pretty good, but he just has a couple ugly reps per game. But it was pointing positively, right? And then he had an injury and missed 3 games, but the results were worse after that, right? And just some numbers on this. In those first 4 games, he had a sack, a QB hit, and 4 pressures. Right, so a negative result once every 21 and a half pass blocking snaps, a sack every 129 snaps. Post-injury, he had 4 sacks, 1 QB hit, and 19 pressures. A negative result once every 13 and a half snaps, and a sack every 81 snaps. So, obviously worse production. Now, I don't think that's solely injury, right? And we'll go into that. I think some of that is D lineman catching up on what he liked to do. But it was a bad year, right? In 13 games total, 5 sacks, a QB hit, 23 pressures. 32nd out of 32 centers in pass blocking efficiency, the 5th most sacks allowed, and total pressures allowed last year. It was a bad season, but I have there's reasons why I have hope in John Michael Schmitz, and it's not the same as Evan Neal, where it's just man, I just hope this works out, because there was nothing positive to point to his rookie year.
No, not at all. I mean, obviously you want to see the trajectory get better, but it wasn't there for JMS. But it was, if anything, it was the opposite. But like I said, I think we're gonna break down why him starting off the year a little bit stronger than how he ended it isn't a bad thing, but it's context within a season. Yeah, but within the first 4 weeks of the season, he was 19th in efficiency, and this is out of 32 or 33 centers that qualified. First 4 weeks of the season, he was 19th in efficiency, 13th in hurries, and one of 17 players to allow 1 sack or less. And basically, he was tied for the 4th most hurries, last in efficiency. So if you break down his whole season numbers, he's almost last in everything, or bottom 5, bottom 4. But within the first 4 weeks, smaller sample size, he was almost average.
And in those first 4 weeks, you talk about, okay, the sacks and pressures he lined up. Guess what they mostly were? Micah Parsons lining up at fucking center.
Sure, not fair.
On center, and Javon Hargrave versus the 40. Those were the ugly reps, right? Yeah. Where in the end of the season, it was Fedarian Mathis, who's the 3rd defensive tackle on the Commanders, great. And Kobe Turner, who had a really good rookie year, but at the end of the day, a rookie in the same draft class as John Michael Schmitz, right? That's the stuff that bothers you. And he started out playing aggressive in his pass sets, aggressive punch, getting his hands on guys, replacing hands and stuff. And then you saw, at the last few games of the year, he wasn't setting to the full man, head up, which I think partly was maybe I've gotten beat and had some ugly reps by setting quickly to the guy where he counters, so I'm not going to set to the full man. And letting guys get to his shoulder, not working his hands as much. His pass sets were more passive and less aggressive than they were. So I think part of it is confidence. But, every time the Giants have a new O-line coach, it's this guy's going to fix them, right? And that's been the case for Evan Neal. Carmen Brasillo. You haven't seen Evan Neal with Carmen Brasillo, with Bobby Johnson. And Bobby Johnson was an objectively bad offensive line coach, right? It's very rare for me and you to call for the firing of a position coach, but it was undoubtedly the right decision to do. And Brian Dable did it to his friend, right? And our biggest set of evidence was, why did Tyree Phillips get cut? Looked awful in training camp, go to another team's practice squad for a month and came back a better player, right? That was the evidence right there. So, but now with Evan Neal, I think his issues are beyond coaching. Where John Michael Schmitz, he's the guy who I'm excited to see what Carmen Brasillo has done with him and the detail orientation that he has. That's the guy that I'm looking forward to seeing with the Carmen Brasillo bup, not necessarily Evan Neal.
Do you want to describe his pass blocking? Because I have a lot of optimism for him as a run blocker, because that's where I think a lot of the good play sticks out. But if you want to go through him as a pass blocker, feel free.
Yeah, and as it got worse on the season, again, I don't think it's solely the injury. I think some defensive linemen kind of caught up with what his tricks were, right? Yeah. The way he used his hands, and they were timing that up pretty well. And he also just struggles with lateral movement sometimes, right? Now, it's not some total weakness, right? He's not some like boom, boom, plot, like how's this guy out there type guy, but it's certainly not a strength. And, that was one of the weaknesses we talked about him when the Giants drafted him. So that, it's hard to be an elite center when you're not elite athleticism wise. So that's where you saw the good is, right? Getting quick, getting on guys, getting his hands on guys. But in the NFL, there are just some defensive tackles that can be dominant, right? And can throw you around if you're pushing a little bit. So he's kind of got to find the balance in there. But I think the biggest thing for him is changing up your pass sets, right? Changing up the way you use your hands and showing your hands and then taking them and then replacing. Those are the types of things where I think, he can make a jump from year one to year two. And again, playing with, because you saw he was lacking confidence in the end of the season because he was just much more passive in his pass sets.
Hopefully better guard play will help him too. You're not playing next to different guys every week. You're playing next to better guys as well. So hopefully that will help him in that category.
The one thing I thought he was good at was very good at like the IQ of the game, right? Like he was getting guys. There was multiple times where Marcus McKeithen was next to him, and he's mid snap, like go. So I thought he did a good job with that type of stuff. And with vets next to him, there'll be he's going to be the one calling out stuff.
Yeah.
But I think there'll be less having to worry about the guys next to you, because you saw like good stunt pickup, and in the end you saw it be really bad, where that was never an issue before, at the University of Minnesota for him.
Yeah, for sure. Can we talk about him as run blocker? Because that's where I get excited, where I feel like he's an intense dude. It seems some good stuff seems to be there. I mean, talk about getting out of his stance. I think he gets out of his stance well. I think he gets leverage, and I think he's able to dump guys, and that's where I feel like we're going to see good John Michael Schmitz stuff. He's already good at getting to the secondary level. He plants some guys on the ground. So I'm excited about him as a run blocker in year two.
Yeah, he's good in the gap stuff, right? Like he gets good movement on first pop. He fires off the ball. He uses his hands the right way, and he actually rolls his hips through pretty well. When he's working his combos, it's kind of like he does it really, really well, whichever way that they're doing them, right? Whether it's like you climb the linebacker or he climbs the linebacker, he just does those really well. He has a good feel for them, and they get movement on those things. And I think he's good at like reworking his leverage, where you see the wrestling background, right? Where he does a good job, getting to the second level doing that, but, reworking his way in those run games. And you mentioned before, I think in the run games where I think he can benefit a lot from playing next to some stronger, just better overall guards next to him, where last year it was a shit show at the guard spot. Now, where he does struggle is the wide and outside zone stuff, right? And that's where the lack of foot speed can show up, because he will struggle to cross face sometimes. And when you are not able to get across that, that guy to your right face, and you're there and you're trying to work it, it just puts you in a bad situation where you get pushed in the backfield. And that happened a lot of times when the Giants were trying to do their outside zone stuff, is that JMS is trying to get out there and do that, but he's putting himself in a bad spot because he's not getting to his landmarks, and he's getting pushed in the backfield.
I don't envision them, now that Barkley's gone, I don't envision them like this fitting this offensive line, like outside zone stuff, right?
No, I don't think it's going to be an emphasis of their run game. I think it's going to be heavy gap type of stuff.
But they need to find an identity, because that's one thing that we've talked about a lot, is that 2022, they had that identity. We were talking outside about pin and pull. They ran these concept that worked, and
that's something they got away from last year. And you can get out and run the pin and pull type of stuff. So, like you can do those types of things.
You even saw him get out in space. I mentioned this in the Andrew Thomas PPP, but it was Thomas and JMS that got out there on that Wan'Dale Robinson sweep touchdown. And without those two guys making those key blocks, I think Thomas just blocked like a secondary player, but I think JMS was able to get an interior guy and wash him out of the way. So that's cool. He can move just in a very specific way. Kill the bug.
Absolutely. Anything else on JMS?
That's it. Hoping for need a year two jump, because I do feel like we know what we're going to get in the veterans, right? I feel like we have a good idea of what we're going to get out of Illuminor. Have a good idea on what we're going to get out of Runyon. We're not, just, hey, don't be Mark Lewinsky. Don't come in here and get worse like Mark Lewinsky. We know what you're going to get. We know what we're going to get out of Andrew Thomas. It's kind of JMS that can.
Yeah, he's the swing player on this offensive line.
Yeah, for sure. Like if you get out there and we start acting like we're an above-average center, I think that could change the trajectory of where this offensive line goes. Maybe not. Hopefully we're not a bottom 5 unit, but transferring the unit to a below-average unit to maybe an average unit.
Yeah. Why don't you talk to us about the captain?
Oh, boy. I want you to comment below your favorite captain and/or pirate, because there are a lot of both of them. And I hope you're commenting and you're spamming Captain Morgan. And we're thanking Captain Morgan because guess what? They're going to be with us for every single Talking Giants episode this year. They're sponsoring our summer camp series. And this PPP is brought to you by Captain Morgan. Did you know that they're the official spiced rum of the NFL? That's pretty darn cool. The NFL season, it's upon us. You need the right players in the right game and in the right spots. You need sometimes to spice things up, and same goes for your drinks. When it gets bland, try Captain Morgan Original Spice Rum. It's delicious, crisp, perfect for game day with your friends. Spice it up. You deserve it. Put a little spice in your life. Visit CaptainMorgan.com to find Captain near you. Please drink responsibly. Captain Morgan Original Spice Rum, 35% alcohol by volume. Captain Morgan Rum Company in New York, New York. Bobby Skinner, you'll be glad you did.
You'll be glad you did. Now let's talk about Kayvon Thibodeaux.
He's a captain guy.
6'5". Yeah, he likes a little captain. You could see it sometimes.
Yeah,
in
a little
tweets. 6'5", 250 pounds. 23 years old, entering year 3 after being the 5th overall pick and the first pick of the Joe Shane era. And he boomed last year, right? For 11.5 sacks, 12 tackles for a loss. But the name of the game, and we're going to bring up a lot of numbers in this, but in reality, you can wrap up all the numbers that we're going to talk about and give you all this information and evidence and detail. It does wrap up in the eye test. He needs to be more consistent. Yep. He cannot be a flash player who gets a sack here or there because he needs to be more consistent. You were drafted 5th overall. The expectations are higher for you. And in reality, to contribute consistently to winning games, we need him to be a guy who doesn't just have, 4 or 5 good games per year.
Yeah, Bobby, if this was a guy that was drafted in the 20s of the first round, or even like the second round, third round, like we know that hit rate on edge rushers outside of the first round, it's low. And if this is a guy like, oh my God, this is a 10-sack guy that'll get you some QB hits, but we know that he can get negative plays and 10-plus tackles for loss. And he did that all like in the first 11 games of last year. He got to that double-digit mark through 11 games. Oh my God, we're like, this is a gem. But with the 5th overall pick of the draft, there's just a different level of expectation, man. And I love Kayvon. I love even the trajectory from his rookie year in some ways. Like, what was one of the things that we asked Kayvon to do in his second year? Hey, let's finish a little bit more, because he actually did hit the quarterback. Like he was 11th in QB hits in 2022. The games that he was active in that week 3 to 17 span, he was 11th in hits according to PFF in that span of time. So that wasn't the issue. It's like, hey, it's year 2. Let's see the year 2 jump, and he did it in the negative plays category. But man, I just didn't expect the lack of consistency, which, hey, call us crazy because, we're watching the team so much. We pay attention to the team so much. And, hey, you guys don't like a guy that could get double-digit sacks and tackles for loss. I get it, but it's still true that the consistency and down-out play just needs to get better.
Well, yeah, and, this is like the whole people who said, oh, sacks are an overrated stat. That always kind of drove me nuts because sacks are the most important thing a defensive lineman can do. They get you off the field. There's no other way to create negative yards at
they're drive killers
of that distance than that, right? Even a tackle for a loss is usually 2 yards. A sack is going to be like 7 yards. They end the drive, right? But what they are overrated is as a season-to-season indicator.
Right.
Where total pressures is a better season-to-season indicator. Pass rush win rate, how often you're winning at 2.5 seconds. Those are better indicators than sacks.
How many snaps did Kayvon Thibodeaux play last year?
I don't know.
981. I don't think 13 of those snaps indicate if you're a good football player.
Right. And if you were an NFL analyst and you were saying, okay, who had double-digit sacks last year that is in line to have like nowhere near that? It would be Kayvon Thibodeaux because we'll go through the numbers.
Yep.
Let's go like rookie year versus year 2. Sacks, he went from 68th to 12th, and this is only for edge players. Total sacks, hits, and pressures, he went from 43rd to 47th. And that was while playing 2 more games. He was lower ranked with 2 more games in total sacks, hits, and pressures, pass rush productivity, which is just like sack pressure hit on a per snap basis, went from 41st to 49th. And then pass rush win rate went from 37th to 55th. And I'm not talking 55th out of 100. 55th out of 58 guys in win rate. And Jihad Ward was last, right? Like his pass rush win rate went from 9.7% as a rookie to 6.4%.
That was jarring.
After that rookie season, you're like, is this some dominant rookie season? Absolutely not. But 9.7% is a good number for a rookie.
Yes.
To get up to 13, 14% the next year. And we just saw him go down. And when you look at the sacks, and I don't take away, he had sacks for his backup tackles or bad tackles, right? Because, okay, if there's a lot of bad tackles in the NFL, then everybody would get 10 sacks, right? Not everyone could do what Kayvon Thibodeaux did last year. And the reality is, it was almost only against bad players, right? Like, essentially, except for the Packers, like, every sack that he had was against a bad player, right? And, I look at, like, 5 total, like, this is a stat I went through, right? Games of 5 or more sacks, hits, and pressures combined, right? He only had 3 of those games last year. 3. Right?
And there were 6 games without a hit or sack last year.
And so I went for like the guys that are ranked 15th to 20th and the totals numbers for that, right? Which actually is 7 guys because guys were tied. Bryce Huff had 5, and that's a guy who didn't even play the majority of the snaps. Hassan Reddick had 8. Chase Young had 5. George Karlaftis, same draft class, had 8. Montez Sweat had 5. Rashawn Gary had 5, and Zadarius Smith had 5. Like you can't, and those guys had like 6, 7, 8, and where Kayvon, he just had 5 and 2, and then 8 in another. Yeah. So there's just got to be more dominance in the games where he does play well, and just more consistency, right? And I said this yesterday or 2 days ago on the Brian Burns. We're challenging Brian Burns to be better than what he is, and he needs to be. What my challenge for Kayvon is turn into what Brian Burns was the last 3 years, right? Which is a good, not great edge. Like, that's my goal for Kayvon. I'm not saying, you need to go out and be Nick Bosa or Micah Parsons. I'm not holding him to that standard. But what I will hold him to is, like, you need to be what Brian Burns was for the Carolina Panthers the last few years.
Yeah, for sure. You were going through his 2022 numbers. Some of them were actually better because I separated into weeks 3 to 17 when he played because he missed the first 2 games and then the final game versus the Eagles. So it's even more impressive is 2022 in some of the categories. I would say maybe not even more impressive. It was just more disappointing when you compare it to his advanced numbers of 2023. Now, the thing with Kayvon, man, he performs like Lawrence Taylor against Washington. him and Dex do. It's crazy. And that Jets game, if we win that Jets game, Bobby, we're talking about how the Giants won that game because Kayvon Thibodeaux took over and got 3 sacks. And that's the thing with him, where if he's locked in, he's locked in. Yeah. And he's playing well. And he can take over games against those bad tackles.
He has the ability.
So that's why it's like but against like San Fran, which I understand they have really good football players. Trent Williams is good, but even, their tackles aren't fantastic. But, against those kinds of bigger games, don't disappear.
Yeah, and he's got the speed to get off to really test and pressure offensive tackles, right? Like, he's good using hand fight versus offensive tackles with bad hand usage. The issue is, though, like, if he doesn't win initially, it dies out right there, right? And that's why if you get a tackle who's like, yeah, I can go with you. I'm not you're not going to kill me around the corner. The pass rush dies out, and that's where I think power, right? When all else fails, try and run through a dude, and being able to transition that speed into the power. That's where I think he can really grow, right? And we'll talk about that in the run game as well. That's where he needs to get better because he's got the speed. But if you are only using speed and then the two-handed swipe around the corner, good tackles, that's so easy to prepare for.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're not going to just kill them on pure athleticism. And if you've basically got, 1 or 2 pass rush moves, well, I'm just going to keep my hands away from you. And I'm gonna move my feet with you, and then it's gonna be over. And we saw that way too often with him, right? So those are like that's where he needs to get better, right? Add power, add more to his bag as a pass rusher, because you see that that movie Adverse Mekhi Becton, right, where he shows outside, jumps inside, and then gets back outside. There needs to be more head games with the offensive tackles. Like, you just have to be giving them different things because there's just too many times where it's like he's just getting washed up every single time.
Yeah.
And I also think this is where Bowen can help, right? Where I don't think Shane Bowen's defense makes much difference for Brian Burns because what he played in Carolina. But, we always talked about no one ever had 10 double-digit sacks season under Wink Martin.
Which was really impressive.
And, Kayvon was the first to do it.
Then that's a player like Matt Judon that played there for years.
Yeah. So, and you look at Matthew Judon, like at the beginning of his career, and it's like a little bit similar to Kayvon.
Mm-hmm.
So, Shane Bowen's going to give him more freedom to rush the passer. And that's where it's going to be fun to see with him. But he does need to just grow as a player. He's not just, you don't just place him in this scheme and he's already much better, right? Like he needs to be better at the metrics of pass rush win rate, of total pressures. And guess what? When you do that consistently, the sacks are going to come way more consistently.
Yeah.
You're not going to have 4 sacks, then 11.5, and then back to 6. That's how you're going to get double-digit sacks every single year. There's the best guys who get the sacks and total pressures. There's the little guys below who get the total pressures but maybe can fluctuate in sacks. And then you have the guys who fluctuate every single year, where it's like, doesn't get a ton of pressure, has a 8-sack season this year, 3 the next year, and I don't want Kayvon Thibodeaux falling in that category.
Right, but that's exactly why I think the rest of the stuff other than sacks is also so important, because sacks can be such a fluky stat. Now, why I don't kill Kayvon Thibodeaux for being 50th in quarterback hits this year. You want to know why? Because PFF counts them differently. PFF, and this is what I agree with, by the way. I don't agree with what Pro Football Reference does. Because guess what? Kayvon Thibodeaux in 2022, you want to know why he was 11th in QB hits? Because if the quarterback holds onto the ball for a half a second longer in some of those QB hits, his sacks shoot up to 7 or 8, and then he goes down in QB hits. And it's the same thing in 2023. If the quarterback releases the ball a half second earlier on some of those 11.5 sacks, then Kayvon Thibodeaux doesn't have a double-digit sack season, and his QB hits would go up more. But it's the pressures, and the win rate overall that really does concern me, and it's because of how fluky sacks can be, where 1 year you can have 10, 1 year you can have 4, and it's not necessarily because you've regressed as a player, but you're down in, down out impact.
Yeah. So, but I am excited to see in the Shane Bowen scheme that doesn't necessarily have you always playing, hey, I got to play my run keys first into the player. There's going to be more freestyling to it, and I think that can be fun with Kayvon. Even if he doesn't get to the player that we want him to be, he won't be like the worst in the NFL. Bottom 10 in the NFL in these metrics that we're talking about.
No.
So I think there's a good path there. We'll go quickly in the run game. It's pretty simple, right? I thought he improved quite a bit, but not a dominant edge setter. But had the double-digit tackles for a loss last year. And I think he's a guy who can consistently get tackles for a loss, especially, again, in this new scheme that's going to allow guys to get upfield and try and create negatives.
Yeah, he doubled that production. 6 tackles for loss, 12 tackles for loss in 2023. And, he got there in 11 weeks. He got there in 11 games.
Yeah.
That was probably the most impressive part about all of this.
Yep. All right. That's
Whoa. I want to project a little bit. This is PPPs, right? Player profile and projections.
Yes.
You typically ignore the projection part sometimes. So we talked about with Brian Burns how the expectation is over 10 sacks and somewhere between like 22 to 26 quarterback hits. We picked Kayvon Thibodeaux to go under 10 sacks for this year on our over-under episodes.
9.5. We went under
9.5. We went under 9.5. So what do we want to see?
What I want to
Stat-wise.
see, I want to see 7.5 sacks. Obviously more, but like if I'm happy in the year.
Yeah.
7.5 sacks, 10 to 13 QB hits, and 40 pressures.
Okay.
Right? Where the QB hits have been 11 and 4, and then the pressures have been 25 and 26. Right? So more QB hits and more pressures. The sacks, again, if he's getting consistent pressure and, maybe Brian Burns gets a bunch of sacks that Kayvon could have turned into. So it's, again, like, we need to get sacks, but for what I expect out of him, and again, when we're looking at pass rush productivity and pass rush win rate, where he was 49th and 55th out of 58 guys last year, be 22nd. Be 20th in those. And again, maybe it's not the hype of the 5th overall pick, but it's the player you're going to fucking pay.
Yeah, he had total total there were 52 players with over 40 last year. Yeah, I'm with you. We're drinking the same Kool-Aid.
Yeah, so total my total was 40, 53, 60, right? When you look at total.
Zadarius Smith was 20th last year.
Okay, that's what I'm asking for.
Okay.
That is what I'm asking. That even lined up with the fucking
George Karlaftis, 64. Chase Young, 66.
Same draft class as George Karlaftis. So.
Yeah, that's fair. That's pretty lofty. That's a big jump. That's a big jump.
But that should be the expectation for
Yeah, Kayvon. I agree. Be a top 20 edge rusher.
Yep, that should be the expectation in year 3 for a player.
Yeah.
Because if we're not hitting that and we're similar to this last season and the sacks don't come there the same way they did last year and they're at 6.5, we are talking about a player. It's like, what do you even pay this guy? Like, you don't want to get rid of him, but realistically, what are you paying him?
Right.
So, all right, that's a player profile and projection. We will see you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Big Blue.